Since details of the Skype sex scandal at the Australian Defence Force Academy broke, the Minister's office has been inundated with calls. Stephen Smith's office has confirmed it's received hundreds of complaints about military bastardisation stretching back over decades. Those calls will certainly help keep the 6 inquiries now afoot into Defence busy. Shortly, I'll be talking to the head of one of those investigations, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Elizabeth Broderick. But first, as Chris Ullman explains, there's another serious issue for the Minister, the deep anger aimed at him by some in the military.
Politicians and the military have at least one thing in common. They both know something about power.
A serious error of judgment. I welcome an audit, a stock take.
And there's a power struggle lurking behind the headlines of the Skype sex scandal at the Australian Defence Force Academy. The Minister and his military advisers are battling over who runs defence.
Well, I think there's a lot of ambiguity between the elected government, ministers, cabinet on the one hand, and the defence chiefs on the other, as to roles and responsibilities and authority. And I think these go to the kind of issues we've seen played out over the last few days, but they also go much more deeply to really fundamental questions about the kind of defence force we need and how it should be run.
Sounds like there was a bit of a tussle over discipline, authority here, though.
I don't put it in that way.
Most of the serving and former senior officers contacted by 7:30 say the Defence Minister has overstepped in his determination to bring his military advisers to heel. They say they're angry and dismayed at the way Stephen Smith has conducted himself. One retired general said the Minister had shown a lack of loyalty to defence, a sentiment repeated by many others, but almost none were prepared to speak about the conflict on camera. Jim Wallace is a former commander of the elite Special Air Service.
I think clearly the Minister has every right to hold people accountable, but in this particular occasion I think he's acted preemptively and has not shown loyalty to Commodore Kafer, and really that is my major objection to what's happened and the way it's been handled.
What do you think that people inside defence, particularly military people, would be thinking now about the way that the Minister's conducted himself?
Well, I think that those within defence would be feeling quite aggrieved by this. I imagine there'd be a great deal of anger about what's happened, and I would expect, that there's a need for a repair job.
The Academy scandal is the most visible clash between the Minister and his military advisers, but there have been others. Earlier this year, he made no secret of his anger at being repeatedly told that the transport ship, the Tobruk, was seaworthy when it wasn't.
Well, what is not acceptable is that we have a very clear gap in our heavy lift amphibious capability.
That incident saw an extraordinary alliance between the government and opposition, with a shadow defence spokesman calling for the scalp of the Chief of Navy.
He's exasperated, and I share his exasperation.
The internal reaction in defence to this was anger at the Minister because he hadn't rushed to the aid of the Navy Chief. And when the Chief responded, he didn't say the advice he gave was wrong.
And the Minister got some disappointing advice, disappointing in that it was not advice that I'm sure he would have liked to have got. I didn't like getting it either.
So could this issue be a proxy for the Minister for some of the other fights that he believes he's having with defence?
I suspect it is. I mean, I'm sure Stephen Smith takes very seriously the specific issues at stake in this case in ADFA and the broader questions about the role of women and so on in the ADF. I'm sure he takes a very significant personal interest in those. But I also think what we're seeing here is Smith expressing, getting out into the open, his broader frustrations in the way in which he's found himself working with the organisation, the difficulty he's had in getting straight answers to what seemed to him to be pretty straightforward questions.
One obvious question now is, has the relationship between the Minister and the military been irreparably damaged?
Well, I think Smith has stressed the relationship, but I'm not sure he's done the wrong thing in doing so. I think what's important now is that he doesn't take a step back. He needs to make clear who's in charge.
In the months ahead, Defence faces the kind of public scrutiny it hates, and the multiple inquiries will have plenty of material to work with. According to the Minister's office, since the details of the Academy scandal broke, it has fielded hundreds of complaints, some stretching back decades.
How many
instances? Just as I said yesterday, I'm just not in a position to count them.
All this will expose another deep issue for Defence. The reflexive way it usually deals with any embarrassment is to keep everything inside the tent. Some call it a culture of secrecy. Barrister Bernard COLLAERY knows something of that. He's acted for plaintiffs in a number of defence-related cases, including the tragic fire aboard the HMAS Westralia.
Well, it's more than a culture. It's an instinct, and it's understandable in one sense. Our men and women in the Defence Force are trained constantly to adopt a defensive posture to threats. And the problem is they have that instinct when they perceive a threat, when really they need to apply a civilian standard. It's an instinctive thing.
And that is no small job to remedy.
It's a massive thing. I mean, I don't want to lower the debate, the tone of it, but it's almost as if you're having to train a cat not to chase a mouse.